The first social session we had, it was very clear to see where the individual teams were because they were all standing quite distinctly apart from one another. That's completely changed now. So rather than a series of teams within a team, it feels absolutely now like it is one unified team.
Hi, I'm Belden Mankus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way.
My guest today is Kevin Davidson, Chief Executive Officer at Norman Broadbent plc, a London-headquartered executive search, interim management and board advisory firm with offices also across Cheshire and Scotland. Kevin joined the firm as CEO in September 2021, when the firm was struggling post-pandemic. However, in March of this year, Norman Broadbent announced its best financial results in over a decade. Its 2023 annual report revealed a remarkable 41% increase in revenues. How did they do it? And what role did purpose and strategy play in the firm's recovery? Who better to ask than the CEO? Kevin, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you, Belden. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Let's start by defining our terms a bit. When you think about purpose in the context of business, how do you define it?
One of the challenges is defining purpose as it relates to all of your stakeholders, as you could, in the conventional sense, have it's all about profit for shareholders. If you look at the employee base, it's all about a nice place to work. So I think making sure that purpose does capture the entire stakeholder community's attention and does speak to all of them is fundamental.
When you took on the CEO role, obviously you knew the challenges facing the business. Were you at that time explicitly thinking about purpose as a tool you could use to bring about change, or did it develop in a different way?
I don't know if I came in thinking purpose. I came in thinking culture. That was the starting point of this journey. The absolute beginning was get the team away, talk about who we were as humans, talk about what motivated us as humans, what would inspire us about the business that we were part of, how we would want to interact with one another. And from that, we formed our purpose, our values, and then the culture that has since defined us since that point. So I think that culture eats strategy for breakfast is 100% right. I didn't start with the strategies grow, was we needed to grow headcount, but we needed to retain good people. We needed to make sure that we were bringing in stayed. We needed to make sure discretionary effort was being expended to the benefit of the company and one another. So it absolutely started with culture, and the purpose came from that. I probably would have defined the purpose the same way if I'd done it the other way around, but it wouldn't have belonged to the team. And the team have to be the ones that are the architects of that purpose.
So you described an away day with your team. What did you do in that day? You can't take me into the room when you're doing that work. What was happening?
So there was a wonderful chap that you should talk to in one of your podcasts, I would say, a chap called Don Ledingham and a business called Kianis. And Don and I spent quite a bit of time beforehand co-creating how the 2 days were going to work. We had quite a social first day. We did go-karting, something like that. The cliques that were clear when I arrived, that team there, that geography there. The social piece was nice, great. Then we went to the hotel, and before dinner on the first night, we conducted an exercise called Hinterland. We can all see one another's coastline, but if we go beyond the coastline and into the hinterland, what lies beyond the immediately obvious? So in the hinterland exercise, the whole team split up into twos, and we all had the opportunity to ask one another in the twos for 20 minutes, tell me about your childhood. We went up to age 25. As we all know, with many psychometric assessments, they go back to your childhood, the hard wiring. Each individual had 20 minutes where the other person just asked them, talk to you about your childhood. And quite a number of people were virtually in tears because they were being asked about some things that fundamentally define them that no one had ever asked about. The loss of a sibling, the breakup of parents, something quite traumatic that had defined them and still was there.
the reason we did that was to really break down any perceptions of you're part of that team, you're part of that team, and company had almost gone in on itself rather than we are a team and we're looking outside. So we broke all of that down and we engaged with one another on a human level. At the end of the sessions, you would say to your partner, are you comfortable me sharing everything you shared with me, given some of it was quite emotional, with the rest of the team? And in every instance, everyone said yes. And then at dinner that night, and then rolling into breakfast the next day, each person would introduce their partner. Yeah. So you'd say, I'd like to introduce Belden. Belden was born in. Belden has 2 brothers. Belden's childhood was great. He was a star athlete. There was lots of fun like that. So some people were actually county level athletes that others were like, whoa, really? Then when we went into the day to talk about our values, it was from a place of authenticity because we'd broken ourselves down to the fundamental human characteristics that each one of us have. So that was the way that we did it. And then we had a really impactful day, which from that day we built up what's the value set that we all want to hold ourselves and one another to account on, and then ultimately what's the purpose that's going to drive us.
Did a statement of purpose crystallize? And if so, what was it? Or if it came later, how did it come?
So it didn't crystallize on that day. I think the ingredients were there. And as we then looked to wordsmith, what's our values and what's the purpose, we arrived at purpose, which is to have a lasting positive impact on people's lives and the organizations we serve. And you can take that any way you like. The lasting positive impact on people's lives, that is the candidates we work with, the people we've placed. It's the clients we work with. But to me, most importantly, it's us. That it's the best version of us that goes home at night. It's the best version of us that comes home and when your spouse or your mum or your dad or your child says, how was your day? Tough.
But it's not every day going, oh, same again, that guy, same old, same old.
It's a lasting positive impact on people's lives, not just to pick up the salary to pay the mortgage, but the best version of us comes out by being part of this.
That's a really powerful, inspiring way to think about work. That for a lot of people, it's this horrible trade. You trade away who you are for some money versus actually, no, I'm doing something that makes me more me.
Yeah.
So how did you go from you and the team to the organization as a whole? How did you get the people who are part of Norman Broadbent to engage with this?
So the initial team that went away was representative probably half of the company. We did then expand the exercise out. Everyone did some psychometric assessment work. That again was conducted by Don and his team. So everyone had a good understanding of who they are and how their hardwiring is and how one another is. And the entire team crafted the words of the value statement and the purpose. So we engaged everyone.
When I joined, people said, oh, that website's terrible. It's so old school. When are you changing the website?
And I said, we have to wait. We have to define who we are first, because our image to the outside world needs to be reflective of who we are. It wasn't difficult to upgrade the logo and bring to life the website. And we could have put a bunch of words up on a wall. We could have said integrity, collaboration. We could have done that, but it would have meant nothing. Whereas the fact that it came from the team, and the whole process probably took about 3 months, start to finish. And then we embarked on, okay, now let's get an organization to come in and look at the brand, to look at the website, to look at all of our external collateral.
And was there any resistance to it? Were there any either naysayers or people who were somehow wedded to a different view of the way it ought to be?
I think if I'd come in and said this is how it's going to be, they would have all been naysayers, but I wasn't telling anyone anything. It was defined by them. Everyone had an equal voice. No one was silenced, even if people had quite contrarian views. It was the team that came together with all of this. So no, there wasn't. There might have been a bit of resistance to open oneself up at the start of the process. That would have been the only resistance. It wasn't a resistance to the process. It was just because people had built quite strong veneers. This is who I have to be to survive here. We want to know who you actually are, because that's what's going to create this culture that I am really happy to say we've had virtually zero regretted leavers in the 3 years. And in our professional services business, before you even start thinking about attracting talent, retaining talent is fundamental. And if you don't have your culture, you're never going to do that. How do you know the effort of change, the direction you were trying to go, the culture you were trying to create? How did you know it was succeeding? Is there a story of an incident that made you think, yeah, this is working?
I think retention, absolutely. We had our all company get together last week. We got the whole team together and we went out on Little Venice, the canals up by Paddington, and we had some fun activities. Then we do our values awards, which we do every quarter. So again, when I joined, there was a celebration of financial performance. So every month it would be, and our biggest biller last month was X. Forget that biggest biller X had half the support team in tears during the course of that month. None of that was even recognised. Obviously, financial performance is important and it is recognised, but it's not recognised as the most important thing. So we have values awards every quarter, which everyone in the team nominates a colleague. They nominate a colleague against one of our values and they state why they would like to nominate them. So it's great. It's a bit like the Oscars. They'll go down to a short list of 3. The comments that their colleagues have made about them go up on a screen and everyone's watching it. And then ultimately there's a winner. We do that each quarter and it's great fun. But I think an obvious measure for me was at that event, there's no way you could define which team each individual was in based on who they were standing with. The team is completely collaborative now in a way that, as I said to you, the first social session we had, it was very clear to see where the individual teams were because they were all standing quite distinctly apart from one another. That's completely changed now. So rather than a series of teams within a team, it feels absolutely now like it is one unified team.
How big is Norman Broadbent in terms of number of people?
So we're 60 people now. We were 35 when I joined.
That's stunning growth. I'm going to use a word that doesn't necessarily get used a lot in business, but it feels to me like it applies. It seems to be part of what you're trying to do is get people to love each other. And I don't mean just to have that bond of connection and respect and affection, positive intent.
So I would absolutely agree. One of our values is simply we care. We care about each other, our clients, our communities, our performance. It's just, and that's it. Treat one another with respect. Care about what we're here to do. So much of the rest can take care of itself. Where people don't line up with that, where the narcissists are just with self-interest and they walk over their colleagues, they don't last here. We've built, as I said, almost doubled the number of headcount in the almost 3 years I've been here. We will absolutely trade billing performance and capability for cultural fit. Because good people can join here and then they can see their own performance improve. If they're additive to culture, then the benefit goes way beyond just when they contribute from a financial point of view. You can get a very big biller in any professional services business, as you recognise. You can get a big biller to come in. It can be so destructive to culture.
You started by talking about the various stakeholders and how you needed to have something that was going to make sense to everybody. How have they reacted to all of this?
Obviously, as a public company, we engage with our investor communities regularly. And they absolutely buy into culture now. They recognise that's what makes a business sustainable. So it can be a little more amorphous. It's a little bit harder to quantify. But they absolutely like to hear what we're doing around culture. They will actually probe. They do like to understand what does that actually mean. And I think in the statistics, as I've stated around retention, that's where some of the measures of success are there. And increasingly, we want that culture to be felt by our clients, and I do believe that it is. Actually engaging with us is a pleasurable experience. Not only do we deliver great results, but we're a good bunch to work with. And I think increasingly, we've got phenomenal stats around repeat business. Clearly, like retention of your team, if you can retain your clients, then you've solved half the battle.
Yeah. Would you say that we're a good bunch to work with is one of the key things that differentiates you from competitors, or are there other things you might point to as equally or maybe even more important?
It's a really good question because you're often asked what's your USP. And of course, we can say we've got a more rigorous process, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I believe we've got as good as anyone has, but I'm not going to say there aren't other good search firms. Of course, there are. And of course, I'm not going to say there aren't good people in other search firms. Of course, there are. that culture as a differentiator goes so far, because I think it's how much does that enable you to retain people, as we've said, but that good bunch to work with. It's not just a good bunch, it's a really curious bunch, because one of our other values is genuine curiosity. And that was the one word that I pushed, because I said it's easy to be curious, but not genuine with it. I'm genuinely curious. And we all talk about that here now. When someone asks how you are, you listen. And if you're not interested, don't ask. I want clients to feel that genuine curiosity, because our business is a consultative business now. It's not just about access to talent. It's about how we can challenge a client at the outset and say, is that really what you want? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It's our ability to really consult. And you can only consult by being curious, to really understand your business, understand the culture of your business, understand the drivers of your business, coupled with your understanding of the labour market, to be able to say, okay, I think we can solve this problem in the way that you've suggested, or we need to consider different angles. And then the same when you're approaching your candidate community, genuine curiosity about where are you in your career journey, what would be the drivers for you to want to make a change. So I think it's not just about being a bunch of good folk to work with. It's ones that stretch and challenge, but in a way that's really constructive and feels like a partnership.
It does seem to me that tension that must exist in those relationships in a positive way connects back to what we were talking about before, that sense of respect and caring. If you care about somebody, at times you will have to challenge them. And that does seem to be something that is really important in the sort of services you're delivering. Could we turn to strategy just for a minute? What's next? Where are you headed next? And how does your purpose help in developing that strategy?
I think you can tie it back, because lasting positive impact on people's lives. Again, if we talk about that from an internal point of view, creating career progression opportunities for your team by scaling up a business, of course it does. I don't think the two are directly linked in our case. That we need to grow. We're a public business. We need to show growth on a continual basis. But we're always, again, looking at how we grow in a way that's additive to the culture. So we've been organic growth so far. We are now looking at inorganic growth options where we could acquire businesses that augment what we've already got. We are looking at internationalization. The challenge we have is it's a very opportunity-rich environment where we go after which geographies might we want to establish offices in. If we wanted to grow in additional sectors, which sectors do we go for? So it's step by step. So our drivers for this year, strategic objectives this year, really start to get some of the potential many opportunities moving. Nationalization, ideally US, where we might get a few people on the ground in the US. About 50% of our executive search work is international, but delivered from here. And there's only so far you can take those client relationships, particularly in markets like North America, where they're typically not importing talent. They've got the talent pool there. So there's only so far you can go with, we're really good and I know you've enjoyed using us, but they will struggle to use us for everything if we don't actually have a presence in the US. And the US is by far the biggest executive search market in the world by a long way. So that's an opportunity for us to tap in. And then that gives career progression opportunities for a lot of the team here. When I lived in the US before and opened offices in the US and Canada and elsewhere around the world, it's been great for staff members to be able to say, do you know, I'd actually quite like to have a stint over in that office. So again, that helps with the retention of the team. It helps with the cross-pollination to make sure that we've got a single culture across a global organization that keeps everyone tied together.
I'm sure you've been thinking about the question I'm going to ask next, and that's the cultural issues around inorganic growth, around acquiring a bunch of people who you can't necessarily feel like they're all going to be part of our culture. How do you think your way through that?
Look, it's getting to know the principles of the business and understanding them, because ultimately they will have driven the culture. Understanding how collaborative they are. You're always going to have outliers in any organization, large or small. But if you've got the core that operates in a certain way, it almost polices itself. So you're absolutely right. It's as easy as perhaps the accounts are to pick up in due diligence. But there's enough that one can pick up through your own perceptions of that business, what the market perceptions might be. But fundamentally, it's getting close to the principals to understand them at a human level, because they ultimately will have been the ones that will have shaped the culture.
One of the challenges I think a lot of professional services firms addressing acquiring other businesses is a sense of we're going to get bigger, and as we grow, are we going to become less ourselves?
So what we want to continue to drive is a couple of mantras. Norman Broadbent is the oldest UK headquartered executive search firm. It's got some cachet, and it still does. So we've got the strength of brand of a company that's far bigger than we are. But as we grow, we really want to maintain the best of the boutique culture. We are in it for one another, that we hustle and we fight and we never take anything for granted. We never take a win for granted. Whereas with some of the larger firms, you win some, you lose some, but there's so much of it coming that it's okay, we'll wait for the next one. That we've got a real passion and an energy so that when we do win something, we know we've fought hard to win it. We are absolutely going to deliver on every expectation our client has of us. So maintaining that boutique culture where we do care about one another whilst the company grows is absolutely fundamental. And as I said to you earlier, if people don't fit in with that and the me becomes bigger than the we, then there will be no place for them.
Looking back on it in retrospect, is there anything you do different?
Very good question. So I would start by saying that if taking this on, someone said, you'll be where we are now in 2.5 years, I would have taken it. So I do believe that the team have delivered phenomenally well in a short period of time. What might I have done differently? There's possibly some of the changes. In hindsight, it's easy, but you have to pick the changes and prioritize them. We've changed the technology platform. We're changing the support function. It was very archaic. Again, when I came in, lack of any HR system, for example. All of those things could probably have been pushed a bit sooner because they were all done last year. I think these are on the margins. I honestly don't think there's much that I would have done differently because we were in a difficult spot as well. There was no pot of cash to say, crack on, you can make a few mistakes along the way because you can just eat up some of that. There was nothing. So in terms of working capital, we've had to generate that through our profitability since joining. So there wasn't really room to do everything at the same time. You had to pick each one off knowing that there isn't really any room for mistakes along the way.
What advice would you give to other CEOs as they think about purpose and strategy for their own organization?
Engage with the team. Really engage with the team. You know, it's difficult because I'm of an era that leadership is a bit more autocratic, that you've got the answers, that you're expected to have the answers. So the boss says this, we will do. Clearly, in leadership, there are times where you need to make the decision. You need to set the tone. You need to drive. I think that's never enough anymore. I think you need to engage with the broader team. You need to let the team come up with the solution and not you drive the solution and just get them to agree with you. So I would say engage and don't be afraid
to not have the answer.
I think don't be afraid. Having humility as a leader now is absolutely fundamental. And it's okay to say, I'm in uncharted territory. This isn't somewhere I've been before. I'd really like your support. That's great. I don't think that creates a lack of confidence from your team and your ability. And if anything, I think it gives them more confidence to hear someone who is honest enough about the fact that they're in uncharted territory.
Anything we haven't touched on that you'd like listeners to know?
Just that last point around leadership, and there's the term servant leader. I don't like that because I don't like the term servant, but I think leader as coach. That's why I try to drive with our leadership team all the time, is that it's just amplifying the point I made earlier that you don't have to have all the answers. You need to help the people who work with you and alongside you to come up with better answers. In the same way as a board would challenge me to make sure I'm coming up with the best answers I can, your ability to help your team, to support your team to come up with the best answers. It's such a mind shift. I did a podcast for the ICAEW not long ago with Helena Morrissey, and we were talking about groupthink in boards and how a lot of board members are of that era that I'm from, where you don't challenge authority. The boss says that's what we do. The boss says that's what we do. I think that's changed so much now. We see it in our children. They will not respect the authority of a teacher just because they're the teacher. The people we're employing now are not just going to respect the boss because they're their boss. You need to earn that respect all the time. And I think being a human and showing humility is more important than anything.
That's a great message. Anything you'd like to ask me?
You've obviously done a lot of these, Bill, and spoken to a number of CEOs on purpose and culture. What would the most common themes be that you're seeing coming back from those conversations, and how would they differ from some of the things that I've mentioned today?
A couple of thoughts on that. One is chief execs think of as purpose really varies tremendously. For some, you started off by saying we need to grow, but it can't all just be about shareholders and making money. There's others where they've pretty much said, I'm actually one of the shareholders, and me and a few mates, we started this business. That's actually a big part of what it's about. So I've heard lots of variations of what purpose means, what it could be. But the other thing I've noticed is something I sometimes describe as purpose grows. So even the ones who started often with a very narrow, it's about money and it's about me. Over time, it's often broadened out. If I'm in it, not just for the money, for fun, to grow, that ought to be about us as the owners, but it also ought to be about our employees. It becomes a bigger thing one way or another. So when you talk about people going home the best versions of themselves, I could see how that could grow into, but what about other businesses? Should we be helping them do the same? Well, what about communities? And what about that? There's always more out there that any seed of an idea of purpose could expand to. And I think one of the biggest challenges is staying focused in the midst of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, some of what we've talked about definitely resonates, and particularly yours, Engage. The most powerful stories I think I've heard about how organizations develop their purpose. Sometimes it's, we started with this. We were founded in order to X. But even then, the issue of helping people, helping the organization as a whole discover, rediscover that, I think is one of the strongest commonalities.
Yeah, if you work in a not-for-profit, I'm on the board of an eyesight charity, and it's easy, its purpose is to eradicate avoidable blindness. Now, they won't achieve that, but they can put metrics along the way and say, as long as we can do X amount. But when you're a commercial organization doing what we do, it's a bit trickier to say our purpose is to save the planet. Our purpose is, now we can do every bit that we can along the way to support in these bigger ambitions. It would be easier 2 decades ago to say our purpose is to drive shareholder return. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly that's part of it. But we won't achieve that if we don't have a lasting positive impact on people's lives. So that's the bit. And if we can come in each day saying, we are having a lasting positive impact on each other's lives, and all the charity outreach that we do, we have the team select our annual charity that we support. We do lots of fundraising initiatives, from the 3 Peaks to running marathons, half marathons. Maggie's cancer charity is the one we're supporting this year. A number of the team members that are about to cycle from the London Maggie's Centre to the Manchester Maggie's Centre. We've done a lot of work with one of the local academies here, where we've gone in and done career fairs. I was there working with them in a careers fair. Then a number of the students have come in here, do a little bit of work experience. Mm-hmm. So these are all of the things that people can feel. Do you know what? That purpose of having a lasting positive impact on people's lives, I'm actually getting the opportunity to do that here. And therefore that's enriching me too.
That's maybe a good note to end on. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us and for being willing and able to share both the journey you and Norman Broadbent are on, but also what I think is some really great lessons out of that.
Thank you very much, Belden.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.